And a few years later, we signed our constitution, and many people call it one of the best constitutions in the world. Within our constitution, there's a number of rights which are put in place, and two of those rights are the right to know. So citizens have got the right, according to the constitution, to have information, as well as a right to free and independent media. Section 32 specifically talks about how everybody has got a right to information. So this is something that anybody within the country should be able to access. And this is information which is held by the government, held by the state. Section 16 of the Constitution talks about the right to freedom of expression. So we should be allowed to speak and say what we as citizens want to say, even if it is critical of the government, as well as the right to have a free and independent media. So that's written into our founding laws in the country. In 2000, so a few years after the Constitution was adopted in 1996, we adopted our Access to Information Law, which is called the Promotion of Access to Information. And the reason why we adopted this is because, according to the Constitution, because we had the right to information, we needed to have additional laws to allow us to be able to access that information. Now, the law allows us to access information both for information which is held by the government as well as some private companies, which is a bit different from other access to information laws across the world, which I think is really important because sometimes as journalists you want to access information about what corporates are doing, what mining companies are doing specifically in South Africa. But a number of things are also happening soon after our first democratic elections. One thing that happened quite quickly was that soon after we became a new and democratic and just country, a lot of funders withdrew, which meant that a number of civil society organizations closed down. The other thing that happened is that because as civil society and the media, we thought that, okay, we've now got a government which is accountable and just and is a good government, we no longer need to be as critical. And so rather than holding the government accountable, civil society acted more like a partner to government, helping them implement programs and supporting them. Another thing that then dominated, which happened in the country, is that we started to have a more dominant one-party state. And so rather than having a multi-party democracy, you had the African National Congress as a very dominant political party with only weak opposition parties. The first, I think, wake-up call for us in the country, as well as for journalists and the media, was one of our first major grand corruption scandals called the arms deal scandal. And this was essentially people within our government spending, it was just under half a billion rand to unnecessarily buy arms, weapons, and all sorts of military goods for a country which isn't at war with anybody else in the region. And this exposed the level of secrecy within our state, the level of corrupt relationship between the government as well as the private sector in the arms deal trade, and also exposed a problematic relationship of political parties receiving money from private corporate companies. So this, I think, gave us all a wake-up call about the level of secrecy and corruption within our state. The other thing that became very clear was that rather than freedom being for everybody in the country, we realized that just because we had a good constitution and now everybody could vote, some of the inequalities within South Africa. So South Africa's got one of the greatest inequality levels, so the gap between the rich and the poor is one of the greatest, and this persisted into democracy, which meant that many of the rights in the constitution, so things like the right to housing, the right to education, the right to a job, many citizens within the country were not realizing things that they thought that they were going to get along with freedom and democracy. Another feature which began to dominate from about the early 2000s and increasingly so thereafter was what we call the increased securitization of the state. And this is essentially the government, rather than using normal civilian tactics to deal with dissent, to deal with protests, we saw the government using increased state military resources to clamp down on protests, to clamp down on civil action, and so unnecessarily arresting, clamping down, and using undue force towards citizens, as well as the increased use of our intelligence agencies to spy on, monitor on citizens trying to agitate for their rights. And then we also saw, especially in 2000 and moving towards here, we began to see a a resurgence of civic action. So we saw citizens beginning to remobilize to start challenging the state about their fundamental rights within the country. And then another trend that began to happen was that our free and independent media was no longer as free as we thought it was going to be. And this came from two places. Government started talking about wanting to regulate the media rather than allowing the media to be self-regulated, as well as the financial pressures towards independent media. And so media houses now being stuck with the problem of not being able to make as much profit, having to move into job cuts and those kinds of pressures. So in this context, the Right to Know campaign in 2010 was formally constituted. So who is the Right to Know campaign? Well, it was formed in 2010, so now 6 years ago, as South Africa's first post-apartheid freedom of expression and access to information movement. It's built from about 400 different civil society, grassroots organizations, activists, journalists, academics, and ordinary people who believe that access to information and freedom of media is vital for any democracy to exist. It was formed initially in response to what was called the Protection of State Security Bill. Now, other countries, I don't know what it's called in Indonesia, for instance, but other countries have got the State Secrets Act. And so basically it's a law where the state can withhold information and say that we're going to withhold information based on national security grounds. The reason why, as journalists and as citizens, we're deeply concerned about this law that was going to be put into place is because it would criminalize ordinary acts of sharing information, which might be deemed as national security. And I'm sure many of us are aware that often when governments talk about national security, the term is very vague and is often used to criticize or clamp down on people who are legitimately just trying to share information in the public interest. In the 6 years since its development, it has branched out beyond just focusing on the secrecy bill to looking at a number of other focal areas, including media freedom, access to information, protection for whistleblowers in the country, as well as campaigning against surveillance by the state and campaigning for the right to protest of citizens in the country. There's a number of campaigns that are ongoing right now. One of them has involved campaigning around our public broadcaster, our television public broadcaster, because state censorship started to encroach on our public broadcaster. So we had our Save Our SABC campaign. We now are trying to get citizens and activists and citizen journalists using our access to information laws to try and get information out of the states so they can advance their struggles. We've had a number of, in the last couple of years, the last 3 years, in fact, we've had a number of internet censorship bills, and that's to include a bill called the Film and Publications Board, which essentially is the government trying to say, if there's content which is posted on the internet or on YouTube or on Facebook, we've got the right to move in and prevent you from publishing that information because we see it as potentially a violation of certain other rights, which is deeply problematic. And the other one, which is sweeping across many African countries, as well as I think there was a protest by journalists it wasn't Malaysia, it was another country, but there's a lot of new legislation around cybersecurity and cyber crimes. And the bill that the government was pushing forward, called the Cyber Crimes Bill, again, was one that we needed to campaign against because of its violation of rights. Another campaign that we moved into was to make journalists aware that just because a police officer, so if a journalist is covering a protest and a police officer asks them to put away their camera or put away their notes, they've got a right to take pictures of a protest. And so we had a campaign saying that as journalists, don't ever feel intimidated by police at a protest, you've got that right, which was really important. And then there's a whole range of other campaign areas related to ensuring that access to information, both in terms of getting information as well as journalists being able to share that information, is strongly protected. Gosh, 2 more minutes? Okay, cool. I just want to quickly run through here. Just other campaigns, I'm going to move straight through it. So how has the Right to Know worked? So why has the Right to Know worked? I think it's a number of things. Within the Right to Know, we like to talk about the 7 principles. And so there's 7 things which we believe work for the Right to Know campaign in terms of building a movement to advance the right to information and the right to free media. The first is bringing together many different struggles around a single cause. And because you've got a strength of many voices which you can approach the government with, often rather than just being a little individual media organization or a little individual civil society organization protesting. If you've got a whole bunch of organizations working together, there's much more likely chance that you'll be listened to. The next is being both strategic but then responsive. And so as much as you might develop plans at the beginning of the year about what sorts of campaigns and activities you want to do, if suddenly you realize that there's a threat around a particular area or something happens or the government passes a new law, we quickly then respond to that rather than just saying, here's our plan, we cannot deviate from it. The next is that our advocacy campaigns happen on multiple levels, and this is really important. So as much as you engage in trying to challenge unjust laws or laws that will violate our rights, we also believe that it's really important to also win the struggle on the streets. And so you'll have public action on the streets together with writing a policy submission to the government, together with maybe even taking that matter to court. And that means that as many as possible people become aware of the issue that's happening, as well as doing publications like the one that I've given you, so putting out a newsletter, a little paper, which summarizes all the multiple struggles that are happening within the Right to Know campaign. We've got lots of popular education material, which is meant to advance people's understanding of what the issues are so that they can be informed to be able to take action. And then we've also got a strong focus on internal democracy within the campaign. And so all decisions, all plans, all policies which are written by the campaign are developed by consensus. And so we'll have a big meeting, people will debate whether or not you want to be involved in a particular area, and based on that, a decision we made. It's not like a top-down decision-making process. It's very, very democratic and very, very flat structure. I don't know why the numbering here is so strange. 1, 2, 1, 2. We also try as much as possible to root all of our campaign areas. So if we've got an issue around access to information, we'll say, how can we link that to a local struggle? And so if you've got citizens who are saying, we need information in order to advance our right to access a house, we'll say, here's the law that you have in place. Now you can use this law to try and access your struggle. And that's really important because people on the ground need to feel as if the campaign area is relevant to their issue, their concern, their grievance. And then the last thing, which has been a big thing that's happened in our country recently, but the importance of not just having transparency around who our funders are within the campaign, so everybody in the campaign knows exactly where the money is coming from, which donors are giving us money, but also making that information publicly available. Last year, we got the government accused the Right to Know campaign of being funded by foreign agencies, by the CIA, and being accused of some kind of regime change, terrorist threat within the country. And we were able to come back and say, but here's a list of all of our donors, here are our financial accounts. If you want to say that this is who we are, then here's the information. How can you accuse us of these kinds of things? So just having that kind of transparency within our own campaign is really important, just because it also builds trust towards the campaign. So this is the National Working Group of the campaign. So this is the National Working Group is elected through the provincial structure. So again, there's lots of internal democracy, and this was at the beginning of the year. And at the beginning of the year, we have a huge meeting which decides what the campaign is going to focus on for the year. So these are all the activists who make up the leadership group of the campaign within the Right to Know, and this gets changed every year. This is the end of my presentation. Perhaps the only last thing to say about the campaign, I know that this is a focus on why it's worked. One thing that we have struggled with, although I come from a media organization, is getting journalists involved in media advocacy work. And so we often find that when we engage in struggles around media freedom issues in the country, many times journalists won't participate in those struggles. So with that, I'm opening up to questions.
Does the Information Commission in Indonesia has any judicial powers to take action against the public bodies which don't disclose the information?
That's a really good question. So our PIRE Act does not have any judicial, so if you want to sue the government for not giving information, you have to go to the court and spend a lot of money to eventually get the matter settled. When our investigative unit wanted to get information about how much money the president was spending on building his house, we had to take that matter to court. But civil society has been fighting now for 16 years to get a special office set up, which is called the Office of the Information Regulator. And that was just recently put in place, which is going to be a huge thing because that's going to allow citizens, journalists, and others to be able to go to this new institution to say, the state hasn't given us the information, we've got the right to the information, now please intervene in that matter, which is a huge step, and it means that the resources, because often the state has got much more money than a journalist would have, than a citizen would have, and so that's a crucial thing. But again, that's taken 16 years of fighting to eventually get this to pass. Yes. Well, could you introduce yourselves? Because I don't know you. Yeah.
My name is Adi. I came from Indonesia.
Yes.
I work as a journalist in Bandung area. Bandung is about 3 hours from Jakarta.
Yeah.
It is 2.5 million people. But Bandung is the capital of West Java. West Java is the most populated province in Indonesia. 42.5 million. We do the same campaign about what you know. We have some barriers to engage public. Hey, you need to know how much is the pricing for the road to build from the government. We start from the student in the university and also from the NGOs and other community, but it's very hard to pursue them to gain your right about the data or information. Can you elaborate how you deal with this kind of situation in your place?
So you're saying that communities aren't interested in your campaign, or you're saying that it's difficult to get the state to give you that information?
For the community, related with the environment, the financial issue, the budgeting issue, with the law,
Yeah.
no problem.
Yeah.
With the wider society,
With the wider, yeah.
the common people, it's very hard.
I mean, if others have got other ideas, the right to know is 6 years in existence, and one thing that we do besides, having the communities use the information is to engage with the media as well. And so we'll issue press statements about what issue we're engaging in, have a list of contacts who the press can then interview to get more about the story, and that creates a public interest about it. So suddenly, rather than just a little community over here having a particular struggle or access to information thing that they're trying to pursue, having a journalist come in and cover that story often then puts it on a much more public platform. That's the one thing. The other thing is there's some issues which are not going to get wide public interest, and that's okay. Sometimes there's just issues that need to have a struggle around it, but it's not going to be the forefront of the issue. And so what you do have is maybe five or six areas which are your high-profile campaigns, and then within those high-profile campaigns, you've got the ones that aren't as much forefront as a high-profile thing. So you might have a campaign about the right to have information about how much money the government is spending on a road. That's your sort of your local struggle. And then your biggest struggle will be about how is the government using money to advance rights and making that the big public campaign. And then using those.
Like to inform you that
we can talk afterwards. Yeah. Yeah.
We'll start within 5 minutes at 2:30 p.m. A21 the National Information Commission of Indonesia, in room C301. Coding and
Okay. Are there other questions?
C307.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe I was a little late to enter the room. Maybe you might have mentioned about the campaign when it started and when it ended. And what is the present situation of the campaign? What are the achievements of the campaign?
So when did it start? 2010. Has it ended? Definitely not. It's only gotten bigger and wider. The present activities is saying rather than having rather than having just one issue area, it's having multiple issue areas, and then also understanding the politics of the day. And so there's been changes in what's happening with the governing party. There's been changes with the access to information laws. And so it's now having a campaign which is adapting to its current context.
Still, there is no law on that.
No, so we do have an access to information law, but as with many laws in any kind of country, they're never perfect. And so what we're doing now is saying, these are the problems with the law that we have in our country, and these are the kinds of reforms that we want. And so saying that it's not fair that, for instance, the last question, that somebody, if they want to get information, the government says no, they've got no other recourse except go to court and spend a lot of money, so we need this information regulator. And so now it's advocating not just for a law, but saying what are the weaknesses in the law and how can we address it? And then also responding to new things. Governments change, societies change, and often the threats also change along with that. And so a new threat that has come up is two areas in our country. The one has been around the use of intelligence agencies to monitor and surveil journalists to try and find out who their sources are. And so we've now got campaigns around surveillance. And the other area is around censorship of the internet. And so saying that the government is now seeing the internet as a new big threat in the country. So how can we have a campaign to say we've got the right to the internet?
I'm working as the Chief Information Commissioner in Bangladesh.
Yes.
So I understand how the execution of the law should be.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it depends on the commission or the government bodies, how they want to regulate it. It depends. So that's why you have to.
But it's a process. Great. We can talk afterwards because I want to. But anyway, so our session is over. What I do have here is a range of our popular education material from the Right to Know campaign. You're more than welcome to help yourself.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Can I?
Yeah, sure.